Before I turn to Ambassador Reese, I'm going to reach beyond you for a moment to General Wald. We heard a little bit about silver bullets, containment. General, as you know, if you ask the Pentagon, what's your focus? They say, well, China's the pacing threat. We've got to build up extended deterrence. Russia and Ukraine is a major threat to the future of security in Europe. I think Secretary of Defense Austin said that the security in our century will be defined by how the Ukraine aggression ends. And so in the Middle East, our friends are saying, is America leaving? Are they losing interest? I still see your Central Command there, but I want to ask you, you look at all these paramilitary activities that Iran's doing, the proxy forces throughout the Middle East, the guns of explosives going to Yemen, all the activities harassing shipping in the Gulf, trying to sort of stay below the attribution wire, gray warfare. I want to just ask you if you could reset the board on U.S. allied friendly deterrence and even trying to persuade Iran to back down. What tactics or what strategy, what approach appeals to you? If you could, what do we need to be doing physically and in policy to try to counter this physical threat of destabilization from Iran?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's great to see you, Ambassador, and the other teammates here. Now that Ambassador Joseph just gave a really brilliant kind of history of a time when it was kind of working. You know, there's a person that obviously knows what he's talking about. You have a person like Ronald Reagan that many times people kid about him, but you know, the simplicity of his, it's either do the right thing or nothing. It was kind of worked pretty good. And then back it up with credible threat. There were some other speakers, I guess they've decided they were so good they left, but they were some really good people earlier today that have covered kind of the waterfront of everything, just like the judge did a minute ago. But there's a couple things that bother me about what the point you just made, and they've been bothering me. Even though I was in Europe for quite a bit of time, I've spent most of my time in the Middle East, actually, in the military, besides Vietnam. And I think a seminal moment was when, and I can kind of understand this, but was when the Secretary of State under President Obama said, we're going to pivot from the Middle East to China. And for those that, you're not like us probably, many of you that play basketball, when you pivot, you turn your back on something. When you turn your back on something, you evidently don't think it's important enough to pay attention to, or don't feel like it's a threat or anything else. And our partners in the Middle East didn't think that was a very good idea. And so the foreign policy during that period of time, I'm independent. I'm not politically inclined. I'm neither Democrat or Republican. I just believe America ought to be strong and our allies ought to be part of that. But when that decision was made, it was frustrating to me to turn our back on the Middle East, for example. And the reason is that you can't wish foreign policy. You've got to kind of treat the world the way it is. And whatever the world is, then you ought to start thinking, in our case, the United States, what's best for our country? What's in our best interest? How do we handle that? In the Middle East, the biggest issue we still have, obviously, is Iran. We've talked about that ad infinitum. But Jim Mattis had a pretty good defense strategy. Number one was, you know, rearm, et cetera. But his number two step out of three was build partner capacity, you know. And that, to me, was a euphemism for, let's get other people to help us do the job. We can't do all of it. We have a global problem in the United States. Whether people like to think that's true or not, the United States has a global security, global foreign policy issue to handle. We are there, and we're going to be there. China, obviously, is a problem for us. That's been said enough. But the Middle East hasn't gone away. This thing about having a non-paper agreement is this just makes me angry. It's cynical. It's phony. It's a way to get out of, I don't want to bother with Iran anymore. I'd like to get away from there. I've got other things to worry about. I've got China to worry about. I've got domestic problems to worry about. I've got the southern border of the United States to worry about. Bad reasons to do that, I think, all of them. We have the capacity to do that. We have the capacity to pay attention in the Middle East. We have the capacity to build partnerships, continue with that. I've spent, like I said, a lot of time there. I was there recently, saw a couple of the crown princes, and their point is, hey, you guys aren't reliable. We're going to go start deciding on Russia being a friend or China being a friend. And that bothers me for all the work that people like you all sitting at this dais besides me from a diplomacy standpoint have put a lot of effort into building relationships in the Middle East and building credibility. From the standpoint of the nuclear agreement, it's pathetic. The fact that we're going to have some kind of handshake that says, whatever it's going to say, I don't know, but they're already, as Ambassador Joseph mentioned, they're already 84% purity for the development of a nuclear weapon. They could turn that over in, as was stated, in days. I can't imagine anything worse than Iran having a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's just, so in 2003, I was in Stuttgart at the time, but the United States government decided we at Stuttgart were not going to share intelligence with the Israelis for a while. The reason is that the Israelis had decided 2003 and 2004 they were going to attack Iran's nuclear capability and hopefully set it back. And Secretary Rumsfeld at the time said, we're not sharing any more intel with Israel. At that time, Saudi Arabia, as well as Turkey, had been letting the Israelis practice bombing runs over both Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was going to allow Israel to come back and land their airplanes after an attack. The reason I bring that up is that they were going to do it in 2003, and they weren't even close. They're at 84%. I don't know this. I'm just speculating. If I'm Netanyahu in Israel, I'm probably going to have to do something about this. And what they'll do is they'll go ahead and attack Iran, knowing they can't do it all themselves, that we're going to get sucked into it. So our foreign policy of appeasement and acquiescence right now is really a stupid idea, in my opinion. Number two, if you look at Ukraine, which we talked about last year in Albania quite a bit, but the issue with the Ukrainian, first of all, they have courage. Number two is we didn't realize, we in the intel community had postulated that the Russians were a really good military, that they were, the quote was, euphemistically, they're 10 feet tall, they're really good military. So prior to their invasion of the Ukraine, just going on 2 years, the Russian military was thought of as the second best military in the world after the U.S. Today, they're the second best military in Ukraine. I mean, so it's like, you just don't know. You just don't know. But the good news is, I think, first of all, the Ukrainians showed tremendous courage, just like the MEK does every day. Number two is they've had great Western support. You can't do this all alone. They can't, and they certainly wouldn't be able to. And three is they have a government, albeit that it was pretty corrupt. It's getting better. They've just, I guess, arrested one of their Supreme Court guys for corruption. But they do have a government that could handle the results of the end state. They have a viable government. The beauty of the MEK is that what happens if the Iranians go away from a governmental standpoint? You have a backup. It's called the MEK and NCRI. You have a viable option. I just think that ought to be, our foreign policy ought to be focused on how do we make sure that government that's shown tremendous unity, courage, ability to get things done. These meetings are not trivial. I mean, I've been to a lot of meetings around the world, and some countries couldn't pull off anything one half this size, much less a group like a diaspora. But The good news is there's an alternative to, if the Iranian regime were to go away, which I hope it does, the current one, and a good alternative, which would be in our interest, okay? And so we as a country should not be at this point acquiescing to the Iranians on some kind of nuclear agreement that is actually going to arm up the Iranians. Two is, there's a whole lot of other work we need to do in the Middle East, I believe, from the standpoint of getting back in the good graces of countries like the Emirates or Saudi Arabia or others. And we need to work that hard, but we're not working it very hard. But anyway, I just think there's a viable option. Inevitably, the Iranian regime will go away. The good news is you're there. I will say one thing, and that's that, and I think somebody mentioned it in the first panel today, you got to be really careful not to screw it up for yourselves. And I'm talking to the MEK now, and say things or do things that will allow the Iranians to make you look bad. Because there are people that don't have any idea who and what you are, what you stand for. Many have been in the U.S. Most of them don't really know who the MEK is, frankly. And many, excuse me, many of them think that you are this cult or terrorist outfit because of what was said earlier. You've got to be careful. Because the Iranians, and when they get with their back against the wall or cornered, which they're getting there, they're going to be cornered, they'll do anything. And it's going to be tough. But we need to be there with you. I hope we are. We'll advocate for it. I think our foreign policy is weak right now, and we should do better. Sorry.
Thank you. We have time to get two quick answers from our other two panelists. General Wald, when I was quite a bit younger, my boss in the Pentagon took me out to Kuwait. We had lunch with the Kuwait defense minister after Khomeini mined the Persian Gulf. And all the oil tankers were at threat of blowing up and whatnot. It was a big job cleaning it up. That led to the reflagging of Kuwaiti tankers with the U.S. flag. And at one point, the U.S., it was then the Middle East Force in Bahrain, now the Fifth Fleet, sunk the Iranian fleet in the Gulf.
Yep.
They sunk them. Tell us, is that kind of a scenario realistic in the U.S. national security community and military and Pentagon community that you know of today in 2023? Could some, and with all these ships being threatened and all these weapons coming across and so much trafficking that State Department likes to write reports about, trafficking in persons and drugs and guns and you name it, could someone put their foot down militarily and say, that's it for the Pasadran, you know, the IRGC gunboats, they're all down? Could that happen today?
I'll give you the short and long answer. Yes, and absolutely yes. So, I mean, you know, first of all, it's easy for some military guy to kind of rattle the sabers and talk tough, and I'm not there, I'm not in charge, I don't have the responsibility. But there's been a tendency, and it's just not just the Democratic administrations, Republicans to a certain extent too, to be very reluctant to use military power as a signal. Now, we've gone in and invaded two countries and not done very well at that. That's a different issue. You know, regime change is not an easy thing to do, and we could talk about that for days. But there are the assassination of Soleimani was a big signal. That was a good move. Those type things. There's always a danger of consequences in those things, but they send big signals. And absolutely, we could, you know, we're not going to get to the point where we're attacking Iranian ships right now because of the way the administration has backed themselves into, I think, a kind of a diplomatic and a negotiation corner here. They should have Bob Joseph doing this. But I do think at some point, I mean, look at all the things they've done. They still fired Americans with drones in Syria continuously. And we then go back and use an F-22 to drop some bomb, which they're not built for, on some target that doesn't make any difference to anybody. That doesn't send much of a signal. I'll tell you where we really made a mistake, as a country, in my belief, was when the Iranians attacked Abqaiq Kurays, the two oil fields in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago. I think it was 2019, if I'm not mistaken. We should have done something right there and then. That would have been a ship thing or some other. The fact that they're able to, and they've stopped this, but fire missiles from Bandar Abbas or other places on the coastline, those things should go the way of the buffalo. As soon as they fire one of those babies, it should be gone, never come back, that whole place. So there is a certain amount of hard power that makes a difference. It enables diplomacy. But so anyway, long answer. The short one is yes. The longer one is absolutely yes.
Thank you.